The only payment she asked for helping that lost being find its way home was a single melody. And that melody, what the visitor from beyond the stars hummed into the silence of her kitchen, is the key to a completely different understanding of music. Forget what your music teacher told you. Forget the theory books, the scales, the history lessons. I'm talking about a connection that has been hidden in plain sight. A missing frequency that, once you hear it, not with your ears, but with your entire body, will make your existence vibrate with a meaning you never knew was possible. I must warn you, this information has a price. It will illuminate blind spots you've lived with your entire life. But it will also cast new shadows in places you thought were bright. If you are willing to confront what you have always been told is simply entertainment, if you are ready to discover why certain songs make you weep without knowing why some melodies feel like memories of places you've never been, then stay with me. Because what happened to Eleanor Voss in the mountains of New Mexico was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of a revelation that has been vibrating in the fabric of this universe since before humanity learned to speak. I fixed a lost traveler's way home. And what she taught me about music will change everything you think you know. Eleanor Voss was 54 years old, a former music professor who had retreated from academia after a crisis of faith, not religious faith, but musical faith. She had spent 30 years teaching students about harmony, counterpoint, and composition, and one morning she had woken up and realized she hadn't truly heard music in years. She could analyze it. She could dissect it. She could explain precisely why Beethoven's Ninth made people cry. But she couldn't feel it anymore. The music had become a cadaver on an examination table, and she was the pathologist. So she had moved to a small adobe house in the high desert of New Mexico, just outside a tiny town called Magdalena, where the nights were impossibly dark and the silence was so deep it had its own texture. She had been living there for 3 years when the night of the strange rain came. It started as an ordinary monsoon, the kind that rolls in fast across the desert in late August, electric and violent. Eleanor was sitting on her porch with a glass of wine, watching the lightning paint white rivers across the sky, when she heard it. Not the thunder. Something underneath the thunder, or perhaps between it. A sound that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't a crash. It wasn't an explosion. It was more like a chord that had been plucked on an instrument the size of a mountain, and then abruptly silenced. A resonance that she felt in her sternum before her ears registered it. She set down her wine. She listened. The rain intensified. The sound didn't repeat. At 62, Eleanor had learned that strange things in the desert were almost always explainable. Flash floods, coyotes, the sonic tricks the canyon walls played with sound. She went inside, made tea, and eventually slept. In the morning, the sky was washed clean to a blue so pure it seemed unreal. Eleanor put on her boots and walked the property, checking for flood damage along the dry creek bed that ran behind her house. That's when she saw it, in the wide flat clearing about 300 meters from her back fence. Something had come down in the night. It wasn't large. That was the first surprise. She had expected something massive. The sound had implied mass. But the object was no bigger than a compact car, and it was partially buried in the still wet soil, as if it had arrived at speed and then simply stopped. The shape was wrong for any earthly aircraft. Too smooth, too organically curved, like a seed pod or an inner ear. The material caught the morning light and held it, neither reflecting nor absorbing, just containing. Eleanor stood at the fence line for a long time. There was someone, something, sitting beside it. The figure was slight, almost willowy. From a distance it looked nearly human, and that nearness was somehow more unsettling than something wildly alien would have been. It was sitting with what she could only describe as dejection. Head down, posture collapsed, the universal body language of someone who has run out of options. Eleanor went back to the house. She made more tea. She sat at the kitchen table for 40 minutes, watching the clock, trying to make a rational decision. When she went back to the window, the figure was still there. It hadn't moved, but now it had placed both hands flat on the ground beside it, palms down, and Eleanor, who had spent her life studying gesture and expression, recognized that posture. She had seen students do exactly that after a particularly devastating jury performance. It was the posture of someone who had given everything and still failed. She picked up her walking stick, not a weapon, she told herself, but a comfort, and she walked out the back gate. She stopped about 10 meters away. The figure looked up. Eleanor's first thought was, the eyes are musical. She couldn't explain why she thought it, but the eyes were deep and dark and seemed to hold overtones the way a cathedral bell does. Layers and frequencies nested inside each other, going down further than the surface suggested. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then the figure opened its mouth. No sound came out, but Eleanor heard, felt, a voice. Not in her ears. In the center of her chest, just behind the sternum. In the exact place she'd felt that strange resonance the night before. I am not a danger to you. I am very sorry for the landing. My navigation system failed in the storm. Eleanor tightened her grip on the walking stick. You're speaking inside me. It is the only way I can communicate with you directly. My vocal range is different from yours. The frequencies are incompatible. But thought travels in frequencies that overlap. I hope it is not too uncomfortable. Eleanor realized she was breathing too fast. She made herself slow down. Are you? What are you? Where did you come from? Far. A very long way. The figure gestured upward, and Eleanor noticed the hands, 4 fingers, slightly longer than human proportions, moving with a particular grace. I travel in ways your physics hasn't fully mapped yet. But the short answer is, I came from somewhere else. My navigation was damaged by the electromagnetic disruption of your storm, and I am stranded until I can repair the resonance calibration of my vessel. What does that mean? Eleanor asked. Resonance calibration? Think of it as the instrument that tells my ship which frequency to vibrate at in order to move. It is out of tune. Severely. And I lack the tools to correct it alone. Eleanor looked at the vessel, then back at the figure. She thought of the dejected posture. You've been sitting here all night. Yes. I calculated my options. There are very few. Eleanor took one slow breath. I'm a musician. Was a musician. I know quite a lot about resonance. The figure's head tilted slightly. I know. That is why I landed near your home specifically. The storm forced me down, yes, but among the available landing sites, this one was chosen. You have an unusual relationship with frequency. Even from above, it was detectable. Eleanor felt something move in her chest. Not fear, but a kind of electric recognition. Like hearing the tonic note after a long, unresolved progression. She lowered her walking stick. Come inside, she said. Tell me what needs to be done. The next 3 days were the most disorienting and exhilarating of Eleanor Voss's life. The first day was technical, or as technical as anything could be when the technology involved was so far beyond her frame of reference that she had to invent new mental categories just to hold the concepts. The visitor, who communicated a name that felt, when it landed in Eleanor's chest, something like a sustained minor third, so Eleanor simply thought of her as Myra, explained the problem carefully, translating across the vast gap between their different understandings of physics. Think of it this way, Myra explained, crouching beside the vessel's open panel while Eleanor peered at the structures inside. You know how a piano that has been in a damp room goes out of tune? Yes. The wood expands, alters the tension of the strings. What you call strings, we call pathways. The pathways of my navigation system are calibrated to resonate at very precise frequencies. Your storm, which produced unusual electromagnetic harmonics, more complex than typical, introduced interference. Like a sustained wrong note played very loudly into the instrument. The pathways absorbed that frequency. They are now vibrating incorrectly, and you need to retune them. Eleanor looked at the structures. They were nothing like strings. They were more like filaments of light, and yet the principle, stated that way, was something she understood in her body. Correct. But the recalibration requires external sound input at precise frequencies. I have the specifications, but I cannot produce the sounds myself. My vocal range, as I said, is incompatible with the frequencies required, and I have no instruments capable of this on board. The storm damaged those as well. Eleanor was already thinking. What frequencies? Myra communicated a sequence of numbers, and Eleanor translated them mentally into musical intervals. She sat back on her heels. That's actually a known chord structure. Modified, but the foundation is what we'd call a just intonation major seventh chord, with some microtonal variations. You understand what I'm describing? Not fully, but enough to attempt it. Let me get my instruments. Eleanor had kept her instruments, even when she had stopped playing. They were in the back room of the house, waiting. A grand piano that took up most of the space and had required 3 men and 1 argument with a door frame to install, 2 guitars, a cello she had never fully mastered but loved, and a collection of Tibetan singing bowls she had acquired in a different phase of her life. She brought the singing bowls out first. The second day was something she would spend the rest of her life trying to describe and always failing to fully capture. Working from Myra's specifications, Eleanor played, and played, and played. The singing bowls established bass frequencies. The cello layered harmonics over them. When she placed the bowls at specific distances from the open panel, as Myra directed, she could see the filaments of light inside the vessel shivering, responding, slowly reorganizing. Between sessions, they talked. And that is when Eleanor began to understand that the real repair happening was not in the vessel. "You've studied music for many decades," Myra said on the second afternoon, as they sat together on the porch while Eleanor rested her arms. "You must have wondered about it. Why it affects your species so profoundly." "I've written papers on it," Eleanor said. "Neurological responses, emotional association, cultural conditioning, evolutionary theories about music as social bonding. All true. All incomplete." Myra's chest communication was measured, as if she was careful about how much to introduce at once. "May I show you something?" She produced a small object from the vessel, a sphere about the size of a grapefruit, made of something that wasn't quite glass and wasn't quite metal. When she held it up, light moved inside it, organizing into patterns. "What you see here are frequency patterns. This is what sound looks like when translated into visual information." Myra manipulated the sphere. "See this pattern? This is what your cello produced this morning during the 3rd resonance sequence. Now watch." The pattern inside the sphere shifted and zoomed, as if it were pulling back to show a larger view. And Eleanor saw, embedded in the pattern of her cello notes, a larger structure. A structure that continued outward, growing, extending, until she realized she was looking at something with the proportions of a galaxy. What is that? That is the frequency signature of this region of space. Watch where your music falls within it. Myra pointed to a small, pulsing node within the vast pattern. "Your cello notes this morning resonated with the background frequency of this part of the universe. Not approximately, not metaphorically, actually and precisely." Eleanor stared at the sphere. "Are you saying what I think you're saying? Music, at least, music that is properly constructed, is not an invention of your species. It is a discovery. You did not create these frequencies. You found them. The universe has been vibrating at these frequencies since before your star formed. Your composers, your musicians, the great ones, were not making something new. They were remembering something ancient." Eleanor felt the back of her neck prickle. Mozart? Found frequencies that had been waiting for 4 billion years for something with ears sophisticated enough to perceive them. Beethoven? Closer than almost anyone to understanding what he was actually reaching for. Myra pointed again to the sphere. His late quartets, these works you find almost unbearably moving, approach within measurable distance of the fundamental resonant frequency of your solar system. Not coincidentally. Eleanor set down her tea. Her hands were slightly unsteady. How is this possible? How does a human composer in 19th century Vienna accidentally tune into the frequency signature of the solar system? Not accidentally. Consciously. Though not with his rational mind. With something else. Myra placed the sphere on the table between them. "This is what your species calls musical genius. It is not a gift from a supernatural source. It is a perceptual capacity, the ability to hear, at some deep level below conscious thought, the vibrations that are actually there, to translate them into a form that other humans can receive. The great composers were not inventing. They were transmitting." Eleanor set the singing bowls aside and sat on the workbench. Her arms ached from 2 hours of sustained playing, But the ache was a good one. The kind that comes from genuine use rather than strain. Tell me something, she said. The frequencies you're describing, cosmic resonance, the universe vibrating at specific pitches, is any of this in our science? Does anyone on Earth actually know about this? Some, Myra said. More than you might think. But the knowledge is fragmented, scattered across disciplines that don't speak to each other, and in some cases actively suppressed. Not through conspiracy, through something quieter and more effective than conspiracy. Through funding. Through prestige. Through the unspoken rules about what constitutes serious inquiry. Give me an example. Myra walked to the vessel's open panel and touched a sequence of points. The sphere of light appeared again, but this time it displayed text, or something that organized itself in Eleanor's mind as text, translated through the same mechanism as speech. Names. Dates. Studies. In the early 20th century, she said, a researcher named Royal Rife developed instruments capable of detecting and producing very precise frequencies. He claimed, and demonstrated, under controlled conditions, that specific frequencies could disrupt the cellular integrity of pathogens. Not kill them with chemicals or heat. Destabilize them with resonance, the way a soprano can shatter glass. His work was documented. His demonstrations were witnessed by credentialed scientists. And then, within a decade, he was professionally destroyed. His research was buried. His instruments were confiscated. Eleanor felt a chill. Why? Because his findings implied something the pharmaceutical model could not accommodate. That the body is primarily a frequency system, and that frequency disruption, not chemical intervention, is the most elegant way to restore it to health. Myra paused. An industry built on chemical solutions has no interest in frequency solutions. Especially solutions that, once understood, could be reproduced by anyone with the right instruments and knowledge. So they buried it. They didn't need to bury it dramatically. They simply stopped funding it. Stopped publishing it. Trained the next generation of scientists to regard it as fringe, as pseudoscience, as the territory of charlatans. Within 2 generations, the researchers who might have built on Rife's work were educated to consider it unworthy of serious attention. Suppression through curriculum. It is very effective. Eleanor thought about this. 30 years in academia. 30 years watching what received grants and what didn't. What got published in the journals that mattered and what got dismissed. She knew this mechanism intimately, though she had never seen it applied to something quite this large. And music specifically? She asked. Is there buried research on music as frequency medicine? There is a concept your scientists call somatics, Myra said. The study of how sound waves organize matter into geometric patterns. A researcher named Hans Jenny documented this extensively in the 1960s, filling metal plates with fine powder or liquid, playing sustained frequencies at them, and watching the matter self-organize into extraordinarily complex and beautiful geometric forms. Mandalas, spirals, lattice structures that matched patterns found in nature, in snowflakes, in shells, in the branching of neurons. I know somatics, Eleanor said. I taught it briefly. As a curiosity. As a curiosity. Yes. Because to teach it as what it actually is, evidence that sound is an organizing principle of matter itself, that the universe builds structure through vibration, would require a complete restructuring of how biology, physics, and medicine are taught. It would imply that the body's tissues, which are constantly being rebuilt at the cellular level, are being organized by the frequencies that surround and permeate them. It would imply that the music you listen to, the sounds in your environment, the frequencies you expose yourself to, are not decorative. They are structural. They are literally shaping the matter of which you are made. Eleanor sat very still. Every song I've ever played, she said slowly. Every concert I've ever attended. The music in elevators and supermarkets and waiting rooms. All of it is physically reorganizing tissue. At a level that is small and cumulative rather than immediate and dramatic. Yes. Which makes it easy to dismiss as trivial. But small and cumulative over a lifetime is how all significant physical change occurs. The food you eat daily. The thoughts you repeat daily. The sounds you immerse yourself in daily. Small and cumulative is how people are built and how they are unmade. Eleanor looked at the singing bowls, the ones she had been using to retune the vessel's filaments. In her mind, she reframed what she had been doing. She hadn't been playing music at a machine. She had been reorganizing matter with frequency, which was what music had always been. She had just never known to call it that. Why does it matter? She asked. If people don't know the mechanism, they still feel the effect. A beautiful piece of music still moves them. They still get the benefit, even without the understanding. Myra was quiet for a moment. Do they? She asked. If you don't know that food is medicine, you might eat whatever is convenient or pleasurable, rather than what supports your body's function. You might be moved by music that is beautiful in a shallow sense but vibrationally inert or even disruptive, and mistake stimulation for resonance. Knowledge of mechanism is not just intellectual satisfaction. It is the difference between using a tool accidentally and using it with intention, between stumbling into healing occasionally and being able to seek it deliberately, between a lucky audience member who happens to cry at the right concert and a human being who understands they have the capacity to tune themselves, deliberately and repeatedly, to the frequencies that sustain life. Eleanor nodded. She understood. She had spent 30 years teaching students to be sophisticated accidental listeners. She had taught them everything except how to do it on purpose. On the evening of the second day, Eleanor asked the question that had been building since the first hour. Why don't we know this? She was sitting on the floor of the studio, surrounded by instruments, the singing bowls still warm from hours of use. If music is this, if it's actually a connection to the fundamental frequencies of the cosmos, why has no one told us? Why is it taught as theory and history and technique, and never as this? Myra considered for a moment. Have you ever noticed, she said carefully, that the most powerful pieces of music are also the ones most likely to make you feel something that frightens you a little? Eleanor thought about it. Yes, the really great ones. There's always a moment where you feel like you're standing at the edge of something enormous. Like if you leaned forward you might fall in. That feeling is recognition. Your body knows, at a cellular level, what it is hearing. It is hearing the universe speak in its own language. And that is terrifying to the conscious mind because it implies something the conscious mind has been conditioned to resist. What does it imply? That you are not separate from it. Myra gestured to the sky, then to Eleanor's chest. That the boundary between you and the cosmos is not a wall but a membrane. Permeable. Vibrational. And music, real music, music built on correct frequencies, dissolves that membrane temporarily. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. You said conditioned to resist. By whom? By systems that depend on the belief in separation. Myra's communication carried a weight that Eleanor was learning to read, a gravity that appeared when the topic was important. Think about it this way. If you understood, truly understood, that you are not a small separate creature in a vast indifferent universe, but a node in a network of vibration that extends from your heartbeat to the edge of the observable cosmos, what would you need? Eleanor thought. You wouldn't need to be afraid of death. If you're part of the frequency, you don't disappear, you just change form. Correct. What else? You wouldn't need external authority to tell you what's meaningful. You could access meaning directly. Through the music. Through the frequency. Yes. Myra paused. Now you understand why this knowledge has been managed. Eleanor felt something cold move through her. Managed. That's a careful word. It is an accurate word. The knowledge has not been destroyed. Destroyed knowledge becomes forbidden knowledge, and forbidden things are always sought. Instead it has been diluted, fragmented, reframed. The vibration is still there, in your greatest music. But the context has been removed. You are taught to experience it as aesthetic pleasure, as cultural artifact, as entertainment. The word entertainment itself is instructive. It comes from roots meaning to hold between, to keep occupied. Music has been redefined from a technology of cosmic connection into a way of passing time. Eleanor stood up slowly, as if the weight of what she was hearing required her to be on her feet. This is why I stopped being able to hear it, she said. This is what happened to me. After 30 years of teaching the theory, the history, the technique, I lost the connection. Because I was teaching people to think about music instead of to hear it. Yes, The academic framework is not without value. But when framework becomes the primary lens, it creates distance between the listener and the frequency. You began to analyze rather than receive. Analysis is a left brain function. Reception is a whole body function. The academy trained one half of your brain to be very sophisticated, and in doing so, made the other half go quiet. Eleanor walked to the piano. She pressed a single key, middle C, and stood there while the note sustained and slowly died. The universe is doing this right now, she said. Not as metaphor. At this moment, and at every moment, there are frequencies moving through you that your instruments of science can measure. The cosmic microwave background radiation, for example, is essentially the echo of the origin of your universe, still propagating, still vibrating through every atom in your body. You are, in the most literal physical sense, bathed continuously in the oldest music in existence. But we can't hear it. You can't hear it with your ears. Your ears are too narrow. They evolved for survival, not for cosmic reception. But there are other organs of perception. Your body responds to frequencies far outside your auditory range. This is why music moves you physically, why it can slow your heartbeat, dilate your blood vessels, alter your hormonal balance, change your brain wave patterns. These are not metaphors or coincidences. This is your body responding to frequencies that resonate with its own fundamental vibrations. Eleanor played another note. Then another. A simple descending phrase that she had improvised thousands of times without thinking about it. Is it possible, she asked carefully, to play intentionally? To consciously tune to these cosmic frequencies? It is not only possible, Myra said. It is what your most profound musical experiences have always been. You have done it. You simply did not have the framework to understand what was happening. Eleanor sat down at the piano bench. Teach me, she said. What followed was unlike any music lesson Eleanor had ever given or received. Myra did not teach her scales or technique. She did not talk about theory or history. She taught Eleanor to listen, but not with her ears. She taught her to listen with her body. Feel the instrument before you play it, Myra said. Place your hands on the closed lid of the piano. Not to play, just to listen. Eleanor did. At first, she felt only the cool smoothness of the lacquered wood. Now breathe, Myra said. Slow the breath until it matches the natural rhythm of your resting heartbeat. Approximately 1 breath every 6 seconds. Do this until the rhythm is automatic. Eleanor breathed. It took several minutes before she stopped thinking about breathing and simply breathed. Now feel for vibration. Not sound, vibration. The piano is not silent even when no one plays it. Wood vibrates. The strings vibrate with the air around them. The pedal mechanism holds attention. Everything is moving. It took Eleanor a long time. But then, she wasn't sure if she'd found it or imagined it. She felt something. A bell of air trembling at the base of her palms where they rested on the wood. A micro-vibration, as if the piano were very softly humming to itself. You feel it, Myra said. It wasn't a question. I think so. It's so subtle. Everything real is subtle until you learn to attend to it. Now, that vibration has a frequency. Your hands are detecting it. Before you play a single note, your body is already in conversation with the instrument. This is how the great players always began, whether they knew it or not. They did not approach the instrument as an object to be controlled. They entered into a dialogue with it. Eleanor understood this. She had seen it in the musicians she most admired, a quality of listening that preceded the first note. She had always attributed it to showmanship. Now she wondered. Now play, Myra said. But here is the difference. Do not decide what to play. That is your rational mind asserting control. Instead, let the instrument ask you. You have been in conversation with it for 10 minutes now. It has a vibration. Match it. Respond to it. Begin there. Eleanor had been improvising for 40 years. She thought she knew what improvisation meant. But this was different. This was not making choices. This was listening for something that was already there and giving it permission to move through her. Her left hand played a low drone, the cello note of the piano, the subterranean foundation. It was the correct note. She knew it was correct not because she had chosen it but because when it sounded, the trembling in her palms intensified, as if the instrument were responding. Her right hand found the melody by following the vibration. It wasn't the melody she would have chosen. It was slower, stranger, built on intervals she would normally have considered too dissonant. And yet it was the most beautiful thing she had played in 30 years. She knew this immediately and absolutely. She played for 20 minutes without stopping. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, she was crying. Not from sadness. From the relief of a very long homecoming. You understand now, Myra said gently. What happened? I stopped being between the music and the frequency, Eleanor said slowly, finding words for something that resisted them. I got out of the way. The music was already there. I just transmitted it. Yes. This is what your greatest composers and performers have always done, in their greatest moments. They called it inspiration. They called it flow. They said the music came through them, not from them. They were describing this experience with the only vocabulary they had. Eleanor wiped her face with the back of her hand. And the cosmic frequency thing? Was what I just played. I was monitoring, Myra said. She produced the sphere again. Watch. The light inside the sphere showed Eleanor's improvisation as a frequency pattern. And there, nested within it, partially but undeniably, was the same larger structure Eleanor had seen the night before. The frequency signature of this region of space. You were imprecise, Myra said, with something that felt like warmth. Inevitably, at first. But in this section here, and here, Myra pointed to specific pulses in the pattern. You were exact. Eleanor stared at the sphere. I tuned to the universe. Briefly. Imperfectly. But yes. Now imagine doing this for 30 years, developing precision through practice and attention. The way any instrument is mastered. Imagine what a person who had spent their entire life learning to receive these frequencies could do. Imagine what they could transmit. What healing they could accomplish. What knowledge they could access. Eleanor thought of Beethoven, writing music he could not physically hear, deaf and isolated and somehow still tuning with imprecise but undeniable accuracy to the frequency signature of the solar system. He knew, she said. Not everything. But he knew something was happening. At the end of his life, yes. He had played enough, and listened enough, and suffered enough, that his rational mind had lost its grip. And what was underneath, the receiving body, the vibrational self, was free. Eleanor set the sphere down. A question had been forming in her since the previous morning, one she had been circling without quite landing on. She landed on it now. What about the ancients? She asked. The cultures we call primitive, the ones that built Stonehenge, the ones who aligned their temples to the solstice, the ones who chanted for days without stopping. Did they know? Myra was quiet in the way that, Eleanor had learned, meant she was considering how much to say. They knew more than you know now, she said finally. Not in the academic sense. They had no equations, no instruments of measurement, no written theory. But they knew in the body. In the practice. They built entire civilizations around the knowledge that sound is the organizing principle of reality. Eleanor sat forward. Tell me. In what you call ancient Egypt, Myra said, the inner sanctums of the great temples were designed as acoustic chambers. The specific dimensions of the rooms, the particular angles of the walls, the materials used in construction, all of it was calculated to produce resonant frequencies when the priests chanted. The chants were not prayers in the sense you mean. They were tuning procedures. The priests were calibrating the space, and through the space, calibrating the people gathered within it. Eleanor thought of the pyramids. The dimensions. The precision that archaeologists still couldn't fully explain. The Great Pyramid, she said slowly, is an instrument. Myra's communication was definitive, unhurried. Not a tomb. Not merely a monument. An instrument built to specific acoustic specifications that amplify and focus particular frequencies. The King's Chamber, in particular, resonates at a frequency that your scientists have measured but never satisfactorily explained. It sits at a harmonic that corresponds precisely to the resonant frequency of the human body's primary energy center. What some traditions call the heart chakra. what your biologists would describe as the electromagnetic field generated by the cardiac cycle. Stand in that room and chant, and you are placing your body's primary oscillator in a chamber that amplifies and mirrors its own frequency back to it. The effect is not spiritual metaphor. It is physics. The ancients built a machine for awakening. Eleanor felt the hair on her arms rise. And they lost this knowledge? Or it was taken? Both? Over time. Civilizations collapse. Libraries burn. The oral traditions that carried the practical knowledge were disrupted by conquest, by plague, by the deliberate suppression of indigenous knowing wherever it was encountered. Myra paused. Your species has a recurring pattern. Each time a culture rediscovers the vibrational nature of reality, each time a tradition builds up sufficient practical knowledge to begin transmitting it widely, that culture is dismantled. Occasionally through violence. More often through absorption. Through being told that their knowing is superstition, their practice is primitive, their technology is inferior. The knowledge doesn't disappear entirely. It goes underground, encoded in ritual, in myth, in the precise intervals of folk music that gets dismissed as quaint. Waiting for a time when someone is ready to hear it again. Eleanor stood very still. Someone like you, Myra said. Teaching in a conservatory. With access to the instruments. With the standing to be taken seriously. With a story to tell that is not dismissible as the ranting of a hermit or the delusion of a mystic. You are in a particular position, Eleanor. The knowledge has come to you in a form you can carry back. Eleanor understood. And she was terrified. And she accepted the terror as the correct response to something genuinely large. On the morning of the third day, the vessel was nearly repaired. Eleanor knew it because the filaments of light inside the open panel had reorganized themselves into what looked like a complete structure. A web or lattice that caught the morning light and distributed it in patterns that made her think, inexplicably, of bark. But before Myra sealed the panel, she asked Eleanor one more question. You left your work. You left the academy, the students, the teaching. Why? Eleanor had not been asked this directly in a long time. She was quiet for a moment, standing in the cool morning with a cup of coffee, watching the desert hawk circle. Because I couldn't feel it anymore. I said that. I became a cadaver cutter. I know that part. But what made you unable to feel it? Eleanor hesitated. Behind the professional explanation, behind the narrative of academic burnout, there was something else. Something she rarely admitted. My daughter died, she said finally. 11 years ago. She was 29. She was a violinist. Much better than I was. She had what I didn't, that ability to simply receive. I could hear it in her playing from the time she was 12 years old. She died in a car accident, and I stopped being able to hear music as anything except a reminder of her. And then eventually I couldn't hear it at all. I turned off the part of me that could receive, because it hurt too much. Myra was quiet for a moment. May I show you something? She asked. Not to cause pain. To offer understanding. Eleanor nodded. Myra produced the sphere again. But this time the light inside it organized into something Eleanor had never seen before. Not a pattern of frequencies, but something more like a map. Or a constellation. What you experience as grief, Myra said slowly, is a form of frequency disruption. A profound disruption. When someone you love ceases to be present in their physical form, a frequency that was woven into yours, a resonance you had built up over decades of proximity and love, suddenly has no physical source. Your body continues to vibrate in response to that frequency, but the answering vibration is absent. This is what grief feels like. Your body reaching for a harmony that no longer sounds. Eleanor's throat tightened. She said nothing. But the frequency does not disappear, Myra said carefully. Watch. The map in the sphere reorganized. Eleanor saw a pulsing node, and then watched as lines extended from it outward, weaving into the larger pattern she now recognized as the cosmic frequency structure. The note doesn't stop. It becomes part of the larger music. Everything that has ever vibrated adds its frequency to the structure. Your daughter's frequency is in there. Not metaphorically. Physically. The resonance she produced, in her music, in her laughter, in the particular quality of her heartbeat. Those vibrations propagated outward. They are still propagating. The universe doesn't erase notes. It accumulates them. Eleanor was crying quietly, and she didn't try to stop it. This is what the great morning music does, Myra continued. A Barber Adagio. A late Schubert sonata. Certain pieces by Arvo Part. These composers, whether consciously or not, were reaching for this frequency. The frequency of accumulated loss. Not to feel bad. To feel connected. Connected to everyone who has ever grieved. Connected to the grief that is woven into the structure of the universe itself. Every star that has burned out. Every species that has ended. Every love that has passed through physical form and returned to the frequency from which it came. Eleanor sat down on the ground. Not gracefully, just Saturday. The dry desert earth was solid under her. That's why music can hold grief, she said. It's because it's already there. The frequency of loss is one of the fundamental vibrations of the cosmos. You are not alone in your grief, Eleanor. You are in resonance with everything that has ever loved and lost. When you play, or when you hear great music, you are not just remembering your daughter. You are joining a choir that includes every being in this universe that has ever cared about something enough to lose it. They sat in silence for a while. The hawks continued their circles. The desert smelled of sage and rain and ancient stone. You can play again, Myra said finally. And when you do, when you receive those frequencies and transmit them, you will not be playing alone. She will be in it. She has always been in it. Eleanor wiped her face. Her hands were steadier than she expected. Is that true? Or is that kind? In my experience, she said, the truest things are usually also the kindest. Eleanor wiped her face again. The desert was very quiet. She could hear, distantly, the sound of wind moving through the pinyon trees at the edge of the property. A sound she normally filtered out as background. Now it seemed to have a pitch. A character. As if the trees were doing something. I want to ask you something uncomfortable, she said. Ask. My daughter, Anna, she was 29 when she died. She had barely started. She had been accepted to a residency with a chamber ensemble in Vienna. She was going to spend 2 years there. And then she was going to come back and we were going to play together again. The way we used to when she was a child. She had the whole rest of her life to develop into what she was becoming. And then a driver who hadn't slept in 20 hours ran a red light on a Tuesday morning in October. Eleanor stopped. She was not crying now. She was something past crying, in the flat, quiet country on the other side of it. What I want to ask is, does that matter? To the universe, I mean. Does it register? That something was cut short? That there was more and it didn't happen? Myra was silent for a long moment. Your universe has a concept in physics, she said finally, called the conservation of energy. Energy is not created or destroyed. It changes form. A fire burns wood and the energy that was stored in the molecular bonds of the wood becomes heat and light. Neither more nor less than what was there. It is a different form of the same amount. I know the concept. Anna's potential, the music she would have made, the students she might have taught, the specific quality of what she heard and transmitted, that is energy. It was not destroyed in October on a Tuesday morning. It changed form. Where it went is not nowhere. It is in you, in what you carry of her, in what she gave you before she left. It is in the students she taught in the years she had. It is in the recordings, if there are any. And it is in the frequency structure itself. Myra touched the sphere and the constellation map appeared again. Here. She pointed to a node. This is her. This is what she contributed to the total vibration of this place. This time, this corner of the cosmos. It is not a large contribution in the scale of the universe. But then, no single instrument in an orchestra is large in the scale of the orchestra. What matters is that it is present. That it belongs. That removing it would make the music different. Lesser. Eleanor stared at the glowing map for a long time. She always said the cello part in a Brahms quartet was the loneliest voice, she said at last. The one that held everything together from underneath but was rarely heard on its own. She loved that. She said there was a particular honor in being necessary without being obvious. Myra let the sphere dim slowly. She was right, she said. about the cello, and about herself. On the afternoon of the third day, the vessel was repaired. Eleanor knew it without being told. She felt the change in the air around it. A subtle harmonic shift, as if the instrument that had been holding an unresolved suspension had finally moved to its resolution. The filaments inside the panel glowed with a steady, even light. The structure was complete. The instrument was in tune. Myra sealed the panel. "You are leaving," Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, but before I go, I have something for you." From the vessel, Myra brought out 3 objects. They looked, from a distance, like tuning forks, but made of a material that shifted between silver and something deeper. A color Eleanor didn't have a name for, something below blue. "These are resonance anchors," Myra said. "They are calibrated to 3 specific frequencies. This one," she held up the first, and Eleanor felt a vibration in her sternum, low and stable as a foundation, "is the frequency of your solar system's fundamental resonance. When you hold this while you play, it will help your body remember that tuning." Eleanor took it. It was warm, and it vibrated with a pulse that matched her heartbeat so precisely it felt like it was hers already. "This one," Myra continued, holding up the second, "is calibrated to the frequency that you and your daughter shared. Every pair of people who love each other develop a shared resonance over time, a harmonic built from the overlap of their individual frequencies. I detected it when I was monitoring your first improvisation. She was in it, Eleanor. Just where I told you she would be." Eleanor received the second fork. When both her hands held both objects, she felt something she hadn't felt in 11 years. A fullness, as if something that had been hollow in her had stopped echoing. "And the third," Myra said, placing the final fork on the table, "is for you to discover. I have calibrated it to the next frequency you are ready to find. I cannot tell you what it is. It will reveal itself when you are prepared to receive it." Eleanor looked at the 3 forks on the table and thought about how she had spent 30 years teaching students about music as an academic subject, a historical artifact, a system of rules to be learned and applied. She thought about how none of it had been wrong, exactly, but how all of it had been missing this. The knowledge that the rules were not rules at all, but descriptions. Descriptions of the universe's own habits. Ways of hearing what was already there. "I don't know how to teach this," she said. "I don't know how to stand up in a classroom and explain that music isn't a human invention." "You don't teach it as a fact," Myra said. "You demonstrate it as an experience. You play differently, and students who are ready will feel the difference and ask what changed. And then you tell them. Not the whole story, not immediately. Just the next piece they are ready for. What if no one believes me? Some won't. That's fine. Those who feel it in their bodies won't need to believe it. They'll know it. There's a difference between belief and knowing. Belief lives in the mind and can be argued with. Knowing lives in the body and is past argument." Myra gathered herself. "Play for people, Eleanor. Play the way you played this morning. That is the only transmission that matters." The vessel began to hum, a low, deep sound that Eleanor recognized immediately. It was the foundational drone she had played the morning of the second day, when the resonance repair first began to work. The vessel was harmonizing with its own output frequency, preparing to move. "Thank you," Eleanor said, "for using my field to land. For choosing this house. I chose it because you were here. And you were here because you needed to be brought back." Myra paused. "You were so close to closing permanently. Another 2 years of silence, and I am not sure the door would have opened again." Eleanor felt the weight of that. Wasn't I? But you didn't. You opened the gate. You walked out to a stranger in your field with a walking stick and a kind heart. That is who you have always been. The music knows it too. The door of the vessel, which had no clear edge, just a threshold that appeared and then began to close. One last thing, Myra's communication came, already somewhat attenuated, as if distance was affecting it. "Every morning, before you do anything else, spend 5 minutes with the first resonance fork. Hold it. Breathe to match its pulse. Let your body remember the tuning. Do this every day, and within a few months, you will not need the fork. The tuning will be internal, permanent, And then you will hear it everywhere. Not just in music. In wind. In water. In the spaces between words when someone you love is speaking. The universe has been singing this whole time. You will finally have ears to hear it with. The vessel rose. It did not rumble or roar. It hummed. A single note, perfect, enormous, felt more than heard. And then, in the way that the most profound musical moments end, it was simply over. The note finished. The vessel was gone. The desert morning continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Eleanor stood in the clearing holding 3 impossible forks and feeling, for the first time in 11 years, completely awake. 6 months later, Eleanor Voss walked back into a classroom. Not the same university. She had no desire to return to that particular stage. But a small music conservatory in Santa Fe, where a colleague had been asking for years if she might consider teaching a single advanced seminar on what she laughingly called perceptual musicianship. Now she agreed. On her own terms. The course was called The Body as Instrument. It had no textbook. It had no written exams. The syllabus was 3 paragraphs long. And from the first session, word spread through the conservatory that something unusual was happening in room 12 on Tuesday afternoons. Eleanor didn't lecture. She demonstrated. She played, but not to show technique. She played the way she had played that morning in the desert, receiving rather than performing, transmitting rather than displaying. And she asked her students to close their eyes and report what they felt in their bodies, not what they heard with their ears. Some were confused. Some were frustrated. Some had been trained so thoroughly in analytical listening that they had to unlearn it before they could relearn it, and that was painful. But some, on the first day, 3 of the 12 students, and by the 3rd week, 7 of them, felt it. A young pianist named Marcus, who had been struggling for 2 years with performance anxiety that froze him at concerts, described it this way. It was like the music stopped being something I was responsible for. I could feel that it was already there, and I was just letting it through. And when I let it through, there was nothing to be afraid of, because I wasn't the one doing it. The universe was doing it. I was just the opening. A cellist named Priya said, I've been playing for 20 years and I've had maybe 10 moments where it felt like this. I always thought they were accidents. Now I understand they weren't accidents. They were the moments when I got out of the way. A violinist named Thomas, who was 17 and technically the most gifted student Eleanor had taught in a decade, was the hardest case. He was so thoroughly trained, so precisely accomplished, that the analytical scaffolding was load-bearing. Removing it felt dangerous, like pulling a wall that was holding up a ceiling. He resisted for 3 weeks. Showed up to class, did the exercises with visible skepticism, played brilliantly in the technical sense, and heard nothing that the others were beginning to hear. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor did something she had never done in 30 years of teaching. She stopped the class entirely. She put down her baton. She told everyone to set down their instruments. And she sat at the piano and played, not demonstrating, not instructing, not performing, simply transmitting, the way Myra had taught her. The way she had played that first morning in the desert. She played for 11 minutes without stopping. When she finished and looked up, Thomas had his face in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. The room was completely silent. After a long moment he looked up, and his expression was the expression Eleanor now recognized. The look of arrival after a journey you didn't know you were on. I've been playing the wrong thing my whole life, he said. Not wrong notes. Wrong direction. Like I've been playing at people instead of through myself into something larger. Yes, Eleanor said. Exactly that. What do I do? Start over, she said. Not from the beginning technically. From the beginning in terms of what you're listening for. Bring the technique with you. It's not a problem, it's a gift. But stop using it to impress and start using it to receive. The technique is how you hold the water. The water is what you've been missing. Thomas nodded slowly. It would take him another 2 months before his playing fully shifted, before the technical brilliance stopped being a display and became a vessel. But when it did, Eleanor heard in his sound something that made her stop in the middle of an otherwise ordinary afternoon and stand very still with her hand on the doorframe of the practice room, listening. She heard his daughter in it. Not literally. Not as hallucination or wishful projection. But the quality that had made Anna's playing distinctive, that particular openness, that willingness to let the larger thing move through, was present in Thomas's cello line as he worked through the Brahms. The same frequency, a different instrument, the same note, carried forward. Eleanor stood in the doorway until he finished. Then she walked to the window, looked out at the courtyard where the afternoon light was doing what afternoon light does in Santa Fe, painting everything gold and impossible, and said something quiet to no one in particular. She heard it. She was right. She was never not here. But sometimes, when a student first felt it, that dissolving of the boundary, that sense of being a node in a larger vibration, Eleanor would see their face change. Would see the precise expression she had seen in the mirror on that morning in the desert. Recognition. The look of someone who has heard a piece of music that they somehow already knew. The look of someone who has always suspected the universe was speaking, and has just this moment finally heard it clearly. Eleanor kept the 3 resonance forks on her bedside table. She held the first one every morning. Her body had not yet permanently internalized the tuning. That took longer than 6 months, but she was closer each week. She could feel herself calibrating. Could feel the static of 11 years of silence slowly clarifying into signal. Sometimes at night, in the deep desert quiet, she would pick up the second fork, the one calibrated to the frequency she had shared with her daughter, and hold it until she stopped reaching for an absence and felt, instead, a presence. Not supernatural. Not impossible. Just physics. Just a frequency that propagated outward and never stopped, woven into the structure of the universe along with everything else that had ever loved and been loved. She had not yet found what the third fork was for, but she was not anxious about it. Myra had said it would reveal itself when she was ready. And for the first time in a very long time, Eleanor trusted that readiness was coming. She stood on her porch one evening as the monsoon season returned. Another August, another electric sky, another lightning-mapped desert night. She held all 3 forks together and felt the harmonics they created. Solar system resonance, love's accumulated frequency, and the unknown frequency, trembling at the edge of recognition. And she began to understand. The third frequency was the one she was currently living. The frequency of return. Of the closed thing reopening. Of the stopped instrument beginning, slowly and imperfectly and beautifully, to play. She raised the forks to the storming sky as a kind of salute, or a thank you, or both. Somewhere in the vast architecture of vibration that was the cosmos. Somewhere in the frequency structure that extended from the beating of her heart outward to the edge of everything, something answered. Not in words. In music. It had always been there. She was finally ready to hear it. Eleanor Voss's journey shows something you may have sensed but never quite had the language for. Music is not decoration. It is not entertainment in the small sense of that word. It is not a product or a background or a pleasant way to pass the time. Music is the oldest technology your species ever accessed. The technology of frequency reception, of conscious resonance with a universe that has been vibrating since before your son was born. You have felt this. In those moments when a piece of music reached past every defense and every argument and touched something in you that you can't quite name, you were not having a subjective emotional response. You were receiving a transmission. You were, briefly and imperfectly, in tune. The body that can feel rhythm is the body that knows the heartbeat is a percussion instrument in a cosmic orchestra. The breath that slows to match a slow melody is the breath that is remembering the tidal rhythm of a universe in expansion. The tears that come from a chord you didn't expect are the tears of a system recognizing its own frequency. You don't have to believe this. Your body already knows it. The question is only whether you are willing to listen. Start simply. The next time you hear music that moves you, really moves you, the kind that stops you in the middle of what you were doing, close your eyes. Stop analyzing. Stop identifying. Stop trying to remember where you heard it before or what it reminds you of. Just feel where in your body it lands. What vibrates? What releases? What, for a moment, stops being separate? That is the beginning. And once you have begun, you cannot unbegin. The frequency is always there. The universe has been singing since before you were born. It will be singing after the last of your cells returns to the matter from which it came. The only question is whether, while you are here, while you have a body capable of resonance, while you have this extraordinary and improbable instrument, whether you will let yourself be played. Eleanor let herself be played. So can you. If you want to go deeper, if you want to understand not just the story but the science, the history, and the practice of conscious resonance with music, I am working on a guide that will take you through these principles in a practical, grounded, accessible way. Real exercises. Concrete tools. The framework that Eleanor found in that desert. Available for anyone ready to receive it. When it's ready, the link will be in the comments below. For now, go listen to something that has always moved you without your understanding why. And this time, let it teach you. Subscribe if you want more of these stories. Stories that reach past what you think you know, toward what you have always, somehow, already felt. The universe is speaking. It has always been speaking. Are you ready to hear it?